Valerie Combs, Senior Vice President and Head of Communications at IAC, talks to host Doug Simon on PR's Top Pros Talk.
Valerie, can you start by sharing what IAC is?
Sure. So IAC, not necessarily a household name, but chances are you do know a lot of our portfolio companies. We're a holding company and the birthplace of brands such as Expedia, Match, Tinder, Vimeo, Angie's List, a bunch of really well-known digital companies. We're essentially a holding company, or as we like to say, an anti-conglomerate, because really our whole model is to acquire companies at different stages of their life cycle and then invest in them, grow in them, scale them, and really get them to the point where we can, set them free to stand on their own as a publicly traded company. So we've been doing that for over 30 years. We've created 10 publicly traded companies and around $50 billion of shareholder value at this point. And we, just keep going.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And from what I understand and you've shared, what you're doing now is different from how you started your career.
Yeah, I mean, the main difference being I started my career, in the late 90s, sort of, I'm totally dating myself, but the 1.0 web, kind of at the end of that, basically the tail end, and really with venture-backed startups who had no marketing budgets, and PR was really the way to get their stories told and to really accelerate their business and their funding. So that required a certain skill set. Obviously, moving into a publicly traded company and corporate communications in that context is very different. But what's interesting is that a lot of the skills that I honed in those early days are very relevant, just because our portfolio does include so many different kinds of companies and technologies and brands. And we do have a lot of emerging newer companies or more established brands that are pivoting to new audiences. Those early sort of like startup and agency days, it's still all those skills are really relevant.
Yeah, so what are some of the keys from a communications perspective when you're trying to modernize sort of a well-known brand that people already think they understand everything about it?
This is so core to kind of what we do at IAC all the time. And I always like to say, trying to make changes to a brand without first understanding it is just a recipe for disaster. I think the idea to modernize is really to just clearly express what the brand is in that moment in time and how it should show up for its audiences. And so an example of this that's just more recent is, we acquired People Magazine a few years ago as part of our acquisition of Meredith. And that included a ton of really iconic publications, Food and Wine, Travel and Leisure, Better Homes and Gardens, and People Magazine, which is a brand that's 50 years old. I mean, this is not, a 10, 15-year-old brand. This is a brand that, potentially your grandparents know and has shown up for decades in people's homes, in the grocery store, at the dentist's office. And really, had an incredible amount of trust equity in telling stories about humans. I mean, what People does that's really unusual is the fun breaking celebrity news kind of married with telling stories about everyday people that doing exceptional things. And doing it well over the course of time. And we discovered through some of the data that we had done is that 92% of Americans were trusting People, saying that the trustworthiness of People's reporting and journalism was, either great to exceptional, which really, as we all know, is very unusual in this day and age.
Right.
So we knew all this, but yet, of course, the business wasn't growing. Now, obviously, the magazine is in secular decline, but the brand wasn't reaching new audiences. The digital portion of the business was totally stagnant when other publishers were growing. And it was like, okay, what are we doing wrong here? How do we take this incredible brand and this incredible product and make it make sense for the way consumers want to receive information today? So it was really also about diving deep with our consumer and reorienting the business around digital. It was previously run as a magazine with sort of this digital bolt on to it. Right. We had to make it a digitally native operation. And that meant things like digital only issues and TikTok only covers, and not to be flashy or but that's what our audience wanted. That's where the consumers were going.
I'm not going to try and claim that we're a brand like People Magazine, though within our niche in PR and helping our clients get covered on TV, we are well known and celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. You touch on what are some key ways and suggestions that you've mentioned or would want to mention that might apply to brands like us or other brands that are maybe well known in their space, but how do they think about staying even more relevant and continuing to grow. We think of ourselves as a 40-year-old startup, but who knows if our customers are buying that?
You really do have to pay attention and listen. And I think the other part of that is really understanding, again, getting to the truth of what your value is. Not what you think it is, not what you've messaged it to be, but what you really are at your essence. Our chairman, Mr. Diller, likes to say, and he said this in his book that came out this year, get one of his strengths is getting to the essence of what is really real. And I think once you really understand that, then it becomes much easier to figure out, okay, what do I have the right to do? What rights have I earned to show up in this place at this time with this story? I think the other thing too is your values may not be fluid, but your storytelling and your narrative has to be. Consumers have high expectations, the stakes are high, and they need context and they need continuity. And so I think those are all really important aspects. And the third thing I would say is this notion of being authentic, which is, of course, again, another word that a lot of people are throwing around. But I think the reality about authenticity is that it's actually not easy because it, again, requires you to really look in the mirror and understand who you are. And authenticity looks different based on who you are. What is a really real interpretation of how you talk about your brand that's authentic to one person is not going to look the same for another. And I think as comms professionals in particular, just to talk about our profession, I think about a lot, how do we encourage our executives to be the authentic version of themselves in trying to tell a story? And how does all of our communications across all of our touch points really map to our story, but in an authentic way?
Yeah, I really like what you're saying. And I think maybe in addition, if I'm getting it right, in addition to holding up the mirror to yourself, because of course we see ourselves one way, looking at the various mirrors that the people in our key publics are holding up to us, like what are they seeing? Now, you talked about having to adjust to consumer behavior changes. And what are some more of the ways that you do it? And can you also try and adjust consumer behavior, or are you really just a slave to what they're thinking of and you've got to adjust?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think starting out, you've got to understand, again, before you make any change to a strategy or even attempt to influence someone's behavior, you have to understand what's actually happening. And you have to be a student of it and be curious innately, I think, in order to really understand it and not really have an ego about it. And I think some brands are just naturally good at that, and some corporate environments are naturally good at that, and others just aren't. So you, as a comms professional, I think really have to know the environment you're working in and how much effect you're going to be able to make.
Yeah, and the podcast PR gods are just messaging me in my ear like, Doug, you haven't asked about AI yet.
Oh,
So
yes.
what is the role that AI is playing, especially for these brands that have had such a core identity for so many years, who now need to evolve to meet the moment? Can AI play a role?
AI can definitely play a role and it should play a role, but I think the role that it plays is very different depending on who the brand is. And again, it's really an enabler for an outcome that is really, I think, designed from a human perspective. I think one of the things that's interesting, I mean, obviously I, like everybody else, and very much it's, on me to stay on top of emergent technology, what's going on with AI, the tools, testing them out, also being very aware, is AI going to take over my job? I know that's something that comms professionals, we have to have eyes wide open, right? But I think what's interesting and very, I think, aligned with the theme of this conversation is that the more attention and noise that we kind of have around AI, the more the value of real human voices and actual human experience come to bear on the work that we do. And it's a competitive advantage to be a real person. I mean, if you look back, if you've been doing this work for, let's just take with reporters, right? Dealing with journalists and working with journalists over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the relationships with people, whether it is your executives, your journalists, partners, the power of those relationships are really what help generate the outcomes, the business outcomes that you want. And knowing your business, not just a list of facts, but understanding the nuances of your business, the nuances of your leadership, understanding the constraints on the journalist, building a relationship with the journalist, being able to be empathetic to what's going on with them, and just being a normal person. I mean, honestly, I find that those skills are more important now because of AI.
That's really fascinating. And we're actually utilizing AI for our clients to really identify what are the queries the public is asking when they're trying to get information, and then making sure the earned media that we create for them really matches and associates the brand with those queries to make them more discoverable. Of course, every moment there's all these changes going on. It seems to be accelerating all the time. And you've touched on this, but as we wrap up, what hasn't changed in the process of what we're doing? What's some of the thinking that's still crucial and critical, even though there's so much noise around all that's different?
One area, and this is just in these early days of AI, because my God, we're still just in the early days. It can really accelerate and condense the timeline in your ability to fully master information, or to synthesize information, or analyze information. But at the end of the day, you still have to do that, right? You still have to be the most knowledgeable person in the room when it comes to your product, how it works, to what your customers are experiencing, when it comes to the competitive landscape. You still have to own that and know that, and there's just no way that that, to me, is going to change. And AI can be really helpful in your success in doing that, but it can't replace it.
Great. Well, no one can clearly replace you for providing this kind of information to our viewers and listeners.
I don't know.
Thanks so much.
There may be a Valbot coming up.
Valbot, if there's a Valbot coming up, we'll have them on the show. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.